At that point, we make a Class B biosolids, which then gets land applied, much like you do today. From a standpoint of how does this fit on the site, here's the existing plant up here. The pipe that comes into the plant runs roughly along here. So the water would come in the pipe. Some of it could get diverted over to here. The rest would go to the main building and goes through the system much like it does today. If the flow is low, of course, nothing would get diverted into there. We would repair those, we'd repair the things in this building, and we'd repair a few things on this building. Right now the main building has a failing roof and a few things like that really need maintenance. And we would have to add some sludge storage. Probably right in this area would be a couple of tanks for sludge storage and treatment.
One thing what represented on this side is an area for a volume roughly 5 million gallons for an equalization basin. That's what we determined based on the flow data that we've seen and that we have records on. So it takes quite an area to fill that. I think our estimated depth was like 10 foot.
I think so.
And until we get it surveyed, maybe it could be a little bit deeper, but somewhere in that range. But that's roughly 5 million gallons and almost takes twice the space of the existing footprint. But we do have a lot of infiltration and inflow, and that's been the thing that's been driving the plant out of compliance, is the high flows. So we have almost 2 days of high flow to be held in the equalization basin.
That'll be line and stuff, so actually the river water won't, we'll be below river water there, so the backflow won't get into it. So we're
Right.
the river water.
Yeah, actually, we're kind of up on the bank. I don't know exactly where the river level is, but I think we're up high enough where we're above it.
Water level.
Typically, it's going to be a dry basin. You know, the water that would go in that would be dilute sewage. There's still sewage in it, but it would also have infiltration and inflow in it. So it's relatively dilute sewage, but we wouldn't keep it there any longer than we had to, then bring it back and treat. So normally the basin would be dry.
Get back when those peak green lines are.
Yes.
When we have that.
That's right. And it depends upon the year. Some years you might not use it. Other years you might use it 3, 4, or 5 times.
What material lines that basin? I know you told us, but I forgot.
Typically it's a PVC liner or EPDM liner. EPDM is a word about that long, and I don't think I can say it, but it's a rubber liner or a heavy-duty plastic.
That works for.
Can you penetrate it easily?
No, it's pretty thick. It's probably about maybe twice as thick as one of these cards, maybe 3 times, roughly. And it would depend on the PVC versus EPDM how thick, because the materials have a little different characteristic. But pretty healthy stuff. And generally, I won't lie to you and say it never gets penetrated, because it can. Typically, it doesn't.
Heat and cold, our severe weather changes don't affect it.
They put in UV inhibitors now.
Yeah.
Will it last for 30 years without deterioration? That might be a question in how long.
Probably 20-ish.
It should do the 20.
And just the liner, what's the cost?
I'll have to dig that up for you. It's if I remember right about it, this is coming off the top of my head, $1.25 a square foot. So, you know, if we're lining 5 acres, you can imagine, you know.
Well, I said compared to any of these storage places that we see on big livestock, and I see places where there are bushes growing through them on the side bank.
Yeah.
You know, that's a concern.
Yeah, and you definitely don't want that, because that is a real problem. It's a real problem from a structural standpoint. It's a real problem from a DNR standpoint. And it's a real problem from longevity of the basin standpoint.
Right.
So you bet.
Is that prevented?
That liner is pretty good about keeping that out. The liner typically would run up onto the top of the bank, and then it gets tucked in up on the top. DNR typically would require a road at the top of the bank, so you can drive around it and take pumps or things like that. And it would normally run up to the top of that road and be tucked in on the road. So outside of that, you'd have to possibly mow it or at least spray for weeds once in a while. A lot of places have left them to natural prairie grass, but there's still some maintenance. A lot of places mow them and keep them clean. There is a lot of flow equalization around. Many towns have them. City of Lamar's has a big one. Can't even think of them all. Des Moines has several.
Yes. Many cities are going to this, or finding that they have to if their existing systems are deteriorating. And it turns out that it's still more cost effective to store it and treat it than it is to go back and rebuild all of their sewer system. So it's still cost effective to do it this way.
Have you had any problems with the joints on the EPDM?
They seal them up.
Yeah, they heat with the heat.
Yeah, the heat fusion welding. I haven't seen any that have had problems, but I have heard of it. The City of Lamar's has probably been in there for at least 15 years, and they have had to have a crew come back a few times and fix a few holes. But their seams seem to be pretty good.
And I think they can be patched, right?
Yeah, they put a patch on it, much like a tire, and then they heat welded them back together. But they are, you know, to be honest with you, they're not trouble-free. They're close, but they're not completely maintenance-free.
One of the advantages of this, especially the wetting and the drying, it'll work far better than that, than just with an earth surface. The wetting and drying with an earth surface, you'll have a hard time keeping things from growing in there. With this, it'll be covered. Typically, you'll use a soil sterilant underneath of it as you put it down. And then, of course, it will keep the sunlight out of it, so you shouldn't have growing things in it.
It also makes it a little easier from a construction standpoint. If we have to build the thing out of earthen material only, we have to have special material. If we build it out of with a PVC or some synthetic liner, we don't have to have near the quality of material. One of the other things that I had been asked was, could we put up tanks? You know, steel tanks, concrete tanks, and I did look into that. And the steel tanks, this would be like for a Harvestor style tank, it was $2.6 million for the tank. And I think the liner was a couple $100,000. And that's coming off the top of my head. But what it was very apparent very quickly was it wasn't even remotely cost effective to think about it.
Again, this, I think we've hit all these items as far as the alternate D.
I think so.
Hose and treatment. Next would be compare these alternatives. And probably the biggest thing to compare is the cost, project cost is a direct comparison that we look at all the time. Again, project cost, the Aeromod system, we'd estimated that. Now this is total project cost, including some contingencies and the engineering and everything else involved in it. Aeromod system, 5.9, roughly $6 million. The oxidation did 6.6. Upgrading the RBCs, 7.2. That was the one where we had to add 2 new primary clarifiers and new final clarifiers so that we could handle the full flow. And then in here with alternate D, about 5.2 million. That's the one with the equalization basin, where now we still handle the same flow that we did before, or less. We handle the average day flow. We don't have to handle the peak flows because they're now held in the equalization basin, so we don't have to add new primary clarifiers and new finals. We do still have to replace all the other things that we set in the plant, but it is much more cost effective on a first cost, and also on a total present worth. It's the most cost effective solution there. And we have shown some ranking off to the side as #1 being the best.
And this should be the same thing that we went through with the subcommittee and the mayor and kind of developed this option. This should be the identical costs that we had talked about, as well as how best to attack the problem.
So I might just go back a little bit with our current status. On March 3rd, we did receive, or the city did receive, the Iowa Department of Natural Resources did a proposed consent order, including a fine, or a proposed fine for the city. And part of that order, the city was asked to provide a schedule.